Good evening. My name is Sharon Sandman. Tkachitnianshla, Tkabahebashashin, Halsoy, Shachado, Toruk Unja, Shanella. I am with the Native American Producer Success Project. This evening, our Spring Garden Preparation webinar is presented by Brandon Francis, Education Resource Coordinator. The Native American Producer Success NAPS project is a collaborative effort between developing innovations in Navajo education, New Mexico Cooperative Extension Service, and Dene College Land Grant Office. The project is funded by USDA Office of Partnership and Public Engagement, Outreach, and Assistance for Socially Disadvantaged and Veteran Farmers and Ranchers program.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for the introduction, Sharon and Sadie. Yeah, Shay, Brandon William Francis, Shinisha. Not Otene Tachinishla, though Tutso ni Bashashin, Twitch ini Dashache, Kitlichini Dashanala, I see Jitlijin de Nasha, Shelchina Tkopaha. I always like to give a nice introduction and to establish kinship and let everybody know if we're related. I think me and Sharon were related, brother and sister clan wise, and so just establish kinship and rebuild those bonds of care. And like my mentor always used to say to the late Dr. Larry Emerson, he always used to say, make your introduction long and endearing. Endear yourself to your audience. And that way they'll care what you're talking about. And when you establish and you establish kinship, you're telling people that you're part of a greater community. And as a Navajo and as a Dene person, you're always surrounded by family no matter where you go. And like I mentioned in my introduction, I'm from Jitlijine, Black Mesa, Arizona. And I was lucky enough to grow up raising livestock and dryland farming on Black Mesa, Arizona, in an area called the Joint Use Area, which was an area that was being mined by the Peabody Coal Company all the way up till 2019. And this picture was taken right before I left for college. And we had a really close kinship with not even the animals, but also the plants. And I always like to show this because it's a kind of lifestyle that I grew up loving and I like to share with people and like to share my knowledge with people. And I also like kinship that farming and agriculture and gardening brings to people. And this is a picture of my sisters when they were younger. And as you can see, this is related to our clan, the Nato and the Tachini people. As you can see, they they paint their face. They usually, it goes back, it's a Hopi adopted clan, so they usually paint their faces with chi as sunblock in the summertime when it gets really hot. And this is at one of our at our summer camp up on Black Mesa, where we used to grow our corn and potatoes. And this time of year, we'd be up there preparing the fields. And when we got done with our field, we'd go to our neighbor's field and help them plow and help them get any work. Because a long time ago, that's how planting was done. That's how growing was done. Because it takes a lot to provide food for your family and your friends and for your especially healthy food. So all of us want to do that. And the pandemic and recent times, economic times, have shown us that a lot of us want to return to this traditional way of life, not only because of the health benefits, but also because of the food and the connection with the corn pollen and the connection with the plants. And we have such a deep connection with it. And here's a picture from an area where I school in Kayenta, Arizona. This is El Cap. Even though when I ask this question at various presentations and workshops, they always say, "Oh, it looks like shiprock," but these xenoliths are all over the res, and they're a great historical marker of our geomorphological past. And I like to show this picture because it shows how people used to practice agriculture a long, long time ago. And rather than planting very close together. This gentleman is planting his plants very spaced apart because he's making use of, he knows, he's very familiar with his environment. He's very familiar with the conditions. He lives in the water conditions and the needs of his plants. So in the area where I grew up, I mentioned we do a lot of dry land farming, and a lot of our techniques were learned from our neighbors, the Hopi people that were our close neighbors. And so we learned a lot of our growing techniques. And so every spring around this time, there's on Black Mesa, there's like on the Chushkays and the other mountainous areas, there's still a lot of snow up there. So this time we'd be letting a lot of water saturate into our cornfields, into our growing areas, because in the coming spring there'll be no reliable source of water till the monsoon season came. The connection that we have with our plants not only goes to what we are growing when we plant, but even before we plant, a lot of planning and preparation goes into this time of year, because it's a lot of work, and you want to make it not only as easy as possible, but as planned out as possible. So this is a picture of our house in Farmington and our plants, and we're lucky to have a east facing house. So every morning we go into this room, especially this time of year, and we go in there and pray with our seeds, because we're not only are we blessing ourselves with the corn pollen early in the morning before the sun rises, when the holy people are when they're passing out their best blessings, and we want to bless our seeds as well and prepare them for the upcoming growing season, because we view these seeds as life, and as not only for us, but as our close relatives. So we want to prepare them as well. But there's a lot of knowledge in these seeds as well. They've been growing in conditions with us for thousands, if not for thousands and hundreds of years. So they have knowledge not only how to survive, but to thrive in the conditions that were existing in the past. But we plant them every year, we prepare them for the future. So in this way, we live in a type of a symbiotic relationship where they can't exist without us in the current form, and our culture and our way of life depends on their very survival. So we live very, very closely together. So we want to prepare for the upcoming growing season and plan it out very, very carefully. So some of the first steps into preparing for the upcoming growing season, whether you're a seasoned farmer or a seasoned gardener, or just a backyard gardener, or someone that does it as a little hobby, there's certain things that go into preparation. So I'll give us some of the tips that I use and some of the tips that I can share with you. And as an employee, like Sharon mentioned, of the Agricultural Science Center, it's part of our job at the experiment station up at Farmington, located at Nappy, which was set up in the late 60s and early 70s to help Nappy grow. But Nappy right now is a huge $1 million operation, and it's the biggest industrial agricultural site on the planet, run by indigenous people. So they don't really need that help that they needed in the beginning. So at the Agricultural Science Center, we've kind of moved on to our secondary mission statement, which is to help people in San Juan County and the San Juan River Valley with all their growing needs. So the first tip I like to offer people is to always know your soil type. And different soil types are present all across the reservation, and all across the four corners. We live in a very unique area coming from a geology standpoint. And I'll give you, in the upcoming slides, I'll give you a tip on how you can find out what your soil is made of and how to work with it. The second tip is to know what type of seeds are you going to be growing. Like I said, like I mentioned before, you're preparing, you're thinking about these things because it's slowly becoming that time of year. And so you want to say, am I going to buy these seeds from the store? And are they going to be available? Am I going to grow what I've grown last year? Did I save the seeds properly? So preparing those seeds and preparing yourself is very, very vital. And another, probably the most important question is, what's your access to water? A master gardener here in Farmington gave me a very, very good tip. When I first started my backyard garden and was helping build community gardens in the Farmington area, she said, the fastest way to the poorhouse is to use your own water or use municipal water. So are you going to be using water from your tap from NTUA? Or do you have access to ditch water to an irrigation system? Or are you going to be hauling the water? And are you going to be meeting your plant's needs throughout the growing season? So you got to think about all these things when you first start planting and you're thinking about your garden or thinking about replanting. And also, all of us have jobs and all of us have things that we do. It's not the old days where planting and agriculture are not our primary concerns, but we still want to keep it up as a part of our lives as possible. So we got to think about, will I have enough time to care for the plants? Because when you're a corn planter or when you plant seed, you're making a pact. You're making a pact, like when I was told when I was a kid, you're making a pact between the heaven and the earth that you're going to love these seeds. You're going to love them. You're giving them life. You're nurturing them from very small stage. So will you have enough time to care for them properly? So thinking about scale, am I going to plant 100 plants? Will I have enough time? Will I have enough water? So you got to think about these things before you actually lay down any seed. The next is your soil health. And you look, if you go out into your garden or you go out into your planting area, look at what's growing. You can always tell health of your soil by what it produces. Different plants have different nutritional needs. Different invasive plants, they have different nutritional needs. So whatever's growing is very indicative or can tell you what your soil quality is. And so looking at, did you plant something there last year? Did it take up all the nutrients from the soil? Because if you grow something like corn, it takes up a lot of nitrogen from the soil, am I going to plant corn in the same area? Is there something I have to add to the soil? There's something I can do different so I can have the same harvest or the same vibrant plants. And so you got to think about all these things and make mental notes of it. What I like to do is I like to keep a journal of when I plant stuff, what I planted. And another important thing is know when your last frost date is. I'll have some slides up here, but different regions, if you live in the mountains, you'll have a later frost date. And it's dangerous, like if you put stuff in the ground, the cold air will kill your fragile plants or shock them, and they'll have a harder time growing. So knowing these dates, and they always change and they're always fluctuating, and they fluctuate now more than ever due to climate change, and think about how can I protect them in case there's a freeze at the last minute. Is there a way I can protect them and plan for this? And always have a crop plan, like map out what you're going to do. Draw in areas year after year so you don't grow the same thing year after year, and you actually heal the soil. Because if you have healthy soil, then and the first one is to know your plant zone or your plant hardiness zone. And if you look at the four corners, this is a very simple one. There's more complex ones than this. They actually go into like 7B, 7A, 5A. And if you look, people in Arizona are kind of in zone 6. And then New Mexico goes over into zone 5. And then you could also go into zone 7 if you're in some parts of Utah. But if you're in some parts of Colorado, you can go down to zone 4. So there's different hardiness zones, and what type of plants can grow there is affected by these hardiness zones. And if you want to go onto the USDA site and look at this, and this tells you a good thing, when's a good time to plant. And these are good helpful tips when you're planning out your growing season. And as you can see, it gives it shows you when to plant for perennials and when to plant for annuals. Perennials are just plants that come back year after year and provide for you. You plant them once and they'll keep providing. Annuals are, you only get a single harvest out of them. So these are some helpful tips and helpful websites. Like go down to the USDA hardiness zone map. This is from 2019, but it's still helpful. And here's back to the soil test to see if you have sandy, silty, or clay soil. And as you can see, the milkshake test is basically you're getting a clear jar. I like to recycle a lot of old spaghetti jars and fill it halfway with the soil from your growing area, and fill it almost to the top with water. Squeeze the lid on tight and give it a good shake. And this is a good science experiment to do with your kids and to teach them about different particulate size or the different sizes of the soil in your different particulate sizes. There's sandy, there's silty, and there's clay, and they affect how much water you can give your plants and how long to water. And if in particularly what type of stuff you can grow and how to amend it. A perfect mixture would be 1/3 of each. But then you shake this up, you shake this mixture up, and after about an hour, it'll start to settle out. The heavier particulates will settle to the bottom like sand. Sand's coarse and bigger, and it'll settle to the bottom. The siltier and clay stuff will take a little bit longer. So a good time to let it set and not touch and not disturb is 24 hours. And it'll be stratified. I mean, it'll separate into different layers. They're particularly low in organic matter. So we want to be also thinking about how ways we can build up the organic matter in our soils. And the organic matter will float near the top, and it'll be floating up here. And you can usually tell if there's a lot, they'll be like floating on top. But in particular on the res, they're very low in organic matter. And gardening planting is always is not something new for us indigenous people. It's been around for a long time. Things like companion planting and things like crop rotation is something that our ancestors, people that grew before us for hundreds of years, they practiced. And this is a sand painting of the different places that they used to plant different crops in our cornfields a long time ago. Corn was planted in a certain direction, beans were planted on a certain side, melons and squash, and this all goes back to our song. So our ancestors, they were very good. I like to tell the kids when I present in front of them, where I teach them things. I always say our ancestors, they were master scientists. They knew the names of all the plants in our environment. When you go on a hike, how many plants can you name? I went to school and I can name a lot, but I'm pretty sure I cannot name them all like our ancestors used to. And they had to know this. They had to know this because their very survival depended on them being in tune with their environment. So planting and knowing when to plant and knowing where to plant and how to keep the soil healthy was something our ancestors did very well. And here's some more helpful tips that I like to work on as well. And there'll be some slides on crop rotation coming up, and seed saving is very important. Are those seeds that you saved from last year, are those seeds that you saved from years ago, are they still good? You can do germination tests on them before you even plant to see how many are still viable. And if there's any questions on these, you can always ask me on how to do this. But a lot of times it comes down to proper seed saving techniques, storing your seeds in a cool, dry place over the winter. And some plants, they like to be frozen, like to mimic the winter conditions before they come up. And what type of soil amendments am I going to be adding compost to this? And how do I compost? How do I save the plant material? And how do I return nutrients to my soil? And how do I know what to add to my soil? So I always recommend, skipping down to the second to the last, is I always recommend getting a simple soil test. If you haven't grown on your plot for years and you feel that you don't want to have a long guessing game with what's in your soil, recommend a soil test. Send it to a lab. Some labs, like the lab in Colorado State University, they do a very comprehensive test. They tell you organic matter. They tell you how much nitrogen your soil has. But things like this are very, very, very good when you're thinking about preparing for the growing season. And now's the time to do it when we still have snow and the weather is still a little cold, and we have time. And cover cropping. I cover crop. I always cover crop. Cover cropping is just planting something like vetch or clover to return those nutrients naturally without adding chemical fertilizers to it. Returning it naturally, using plants to help return the nutrients to the soil. And always, if you're questioning how the health of your water, you can always get a water test done as well to see if what you're providing your plants is healthy, because you wouldn't want to give something that you care about, something that you're going to eat, something you're going to feed other people, something you're going to sell. You don't want to risk anything, any layer of contamination. And these are all improvements that you can make. And you got to be thinking about that before you actually lay a garden. And all this planning ahead of time will make it easier things are actually growing in your backyard. So this is an example of some cover crop I threw down the other day. I think it was Monday, and it was cover crop like this. You can go to Durango Co-op, you can order them from Johnny's Seed, and these don't need to be planted very deep. They just need to be planted subsurface. And right now, when we're getting the last of the precipitation from the winter, is a great time to throw it down, because they are very cold tolerant. They'll grow in the springtime when it's still cold in the morning and the evening. They thrive in those conditions. And like I mentioned before, indigenous people, they knew which plants to plant next to each other. People always talk about the three sister method. Other plants that can grow well together, and they thrive when they're near each other. And companion is like having a friend, someone to help you. But also when they have friends, they also have natural enemies. So sometimes you want to keep other plants from harming other plants. So researching what you can grow next to each other is also very vital. Can I grow tomato plants next to these plants? Will they fight each other? Sometimes they'll impede each other's growth. And that goes for invasive plants like are growing naturally in our environment without any help. So doing a little research on what you're going to grow and what helps them. And also I think the next presentation is on pollinators. So planting pollinators is very beneficial. So doing a lot of research on your plants, because getting to know your plant and watching them grow is part of the fun. It's part of learning. That's one of the fun things about agriculture, is you're always learning something new every year. And the learning process never stops, and that's one of the good things. And here's a crop rotation guide for if you grow something in a different spot. If you grow a root vegetable, and you can see next year you can plant a bean, an onion, some sweet corn, and if you plant some brassicas, which are like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, then you can plant beetroot, you can plant carrots and parsnips the next year. And this is just one way you can always prevent taxing your soil too hard and taking the nutrients out. It's a good way to find balance and harmony, because us as indigenous people, we're always searching for balance and harmony. So right now is a good time to test your seeds. What I usually do to test the germination rate is I take a few of the seeds I saved from the previous year, and I plant like 10 of them. And if I'm going to do on a large scale, if 9 of them sprout out of those 10, I multiply it by 10. So that means if I plant 100 seeds of the seeds I saved last year, 80 of them will sprout. So then I think about it, I do the calculation. I'm like, oh, maybe sometimes I might have to throw down 2 seeds, or I might have to replant. But you always want to, my philosophy is it's always better to thin than replant, because some areas they have a short growing season, and replanting is not an option. And that's another thing you got to think about. And it comes back to weather. What are the weather conditions in your area? And I know in the Four Corners, we receive very, very little precipitation in the springtime until the monsoon time. Another thing we got to think about is what kind of pests are in your area. Is there animals or insects that could bother your plants and prevent you from getting a good harvest? Do we know what our plants look like under certain stress conditions? Do we know what they look like when they're lacking water? What do they look like when they're having too much, when it's too hot? There was a farm out here in Aztec over towards Cedar Hill, and they called us in, and they were like, I think our plants, I think they got some type of virus or some type of disease. So we went out there and we looked at these rows and rows of tomato plants, and we took a closer look, and it looked like they were all shriveled up and looked like they were slowly dying. But for that particular summer, it was over 100 degrees in the summertime. So all these tomato plants had closed up their stomatas or stomas, and they were stopped transferring carbon. So they gave the appearance like they were dying and that they had some disease, but they were just under so much heat stress that they stopped their natural process of transferring carbon into oxygen. And knowing these things about your plants is very, very important. So researching them even before you, if you're growing something new, or if you're starting to grow again after a long period of not growing, learning these things is very, very important. It takes a lot of stress out for you and for your plants. So it's very good to know these things and what type of diseases, what type of plant diseases are in the area that could possibly harm your plants. And what do these diseases look like, and how do you prepare for them? And people like to use the word weeds. I like to use the word invasive plants. So what type of invasive plants are naturally occurring in your region? How do you prepare for them? How do you control them? And the cover cropping is a good way to control them, to outcompete them in the early spring. Um, right now, you'll see a lot of plants coming up. If you plant cover crop right now, those cover crop will smother all those invasive plants out. And so they'll, what would I like to say, kill two birds with one stone. They'll return nutrients to your soil, but they'll also combat those invasive plants. And if you don't, and if you're doing this, how are you gonna, what's your cultivation method? How are you gonna control the invasive plants? Are you growing on such a scale that it's gonna get out of control and you won't have time for this? You won't have time to remove all the invasive plants, because things like corn, when you plant corn, they can't have any competitors for the first month. You have to take out every invasive plant in their vicinity for them to have adequate growth time in the first month. These are things you got to prepare for and be aware of before you actually start your garden or start planting. And the pollination, are you providing enough pollinators? Are you providing the right type? Are you planting the right type of pollinators? What are the who's helping you pollinate in your area? Which animals? Are you planting the right things for them? So this is what I like to do. This is me. This is something, as you can see on the yellow tablet, that's tomato seeds. And I'm over here doing a germination test while listening to a webinar on seed starting. So this was like 2 weeks ago, and now the plants, they're about 2 inches tall. So not only do I do this, seed start trays are excellent because they have covers that you can put over them at night. I also have heating pads that go in there to mimic springtime, because outside it's sometimes it reaches down to freezing here at night. And I prepare the soil nicely for them to mimic very good growing conditions, so they have nothing to worry about except growing, and me protecting them from the cold conditions that are present outside. So this is the way I prepare. So when I actually do it on a bigger scale, I'll know if the seeds I bought are actually viable and actually good to plant. Well, knowing the precipitation in your area, maybe you live in the mountains, maybe you live along the river, and maybe you have to haul water. But there's a general rule, west of the Mississippi, we generally receive less than 20 inches of rain. What are your plants' water needs going to be? Are you going to be able to meet them? A long time ago, the Navajo people, they used to plant by the stars. And when Delieje, the Pleiades, disappeared from the night sky around April, that's when our ancestors knew that it was a good time to start planting. Because if they planted after the Pleiades went away and the corn was coming up, right when they were tasseling and putting on ears of corn, they knew that that's when the monsoons would start, and they would be naturally watered by the monsoon season. But due to climate change and due to ever-changing conditions, we can't rely on that anymore. So we got to think about these things and plan ahead right now about how much water we're going to get. So this is just a thing and there are weather stations in your area that keep accurate records going back 50 to 60 years sometimes. See how much rain you've received, and that's very good information to have. One of the indicators of spring is dlon. driving up to work 2 weeks ago, I noticed that those prairie dogs, and I was saying, oh man, just like back east, how they rely on Puxatawny Phil, we kind of rely on our Galunt buddies to let us know that spring is around the corner. And so spring is happening as we speak. And our prairie dogs, our pocket gophers, our voles, our little critters in the ground, our deer, are they going to be pests for your field or what you're growing? Because us Navajos, we have a saying that you have to plant 4 times. One, you have to plant for the elements in case like something like a hailstorm or wind blows over your crops. Another, we plant for the animals like prairie dogs. They're going to come and eat. They're going to take their cut. Nature always takes their cut. And squash bugs, they're going to come plant for the insects. And finally, plant a 4th time, and finally we'll get a harvest. And preparing for this. And squash bugs, they can smell those squash flowers that we plant. They can smell them up to 10 miles away, and they can overwinter in debris piles that you have around. So a good time to get rid of your debris piles is in the fall time, so they don't have any place to overwinter. So preparing for this, am I going to have enough time if I get an infestation of squash bugs? Am I going to have enough time to pick eggs to squash these bugs every time they come out? What are other pests that could bother my plants? How am I going to deal with the Willachie or the Willagina or the aphids? How am I going to deal with them if they infest my plants? And thinking about this beforehand and planting accordingly, because there's certain plants that you can plant alongside it that can limit infestations. But squash bugs are particularly bad because I have yet to find anything. And if anybody has any suggestions on how they deal with it, I'm all ears. We're usually out there in the field in the early morning, looking under the leaves and squashing eggs or scraping eggs and squashing squash bugs. And how are you going to deal with that in the upcoming growing season? Are you going to have enough time? Is there something that you can do to limit this altogether? So another thing to think about and to prepare for is this is the time of year to get your tools ready. Go to your tool shed, do a tool inventory. Do you have enough shovels? Do you have enough hoes? Do you have enough rakes? Are they all sturdy? Are they all in good working condition? Are my tools ready? Do I have enough gloves? Do I have enough hats? Preparing beforehand is very crucial. And right now is a very good time to get your planting stick ready. And I always remember, because when I was a boy, my mom, whenever I would get in trouble for hanging outside as a little boy too long, she was always, quit the wizardish key. That was my name when I was in trouble. So, but Navajos a long time ago, they made their planting sticks out of dark greasewood, the wujijin. And right now is a good time to go out and find yourself a nice planting stick. And be wary because their branches, they have little things that can poke you with, and get poked too many times and get irritated. So I can see I'm grabbing this one with a glove and saw or something to chop a nice planting stick off. And always make an offering. I always make an offering of either corn pollen or tutadine, and I always don't offer it to the plant where I'm taking the branch from. Offer it to the next plant and say, thank you. We're going to use this. This is going to help us in the upcoming growing season. And I don't let any part of this plant go to waste, because even a long time ago, our ancestors, they had pest problems, and anything we plant in the ground, it's food. Like these corn kernels, they're food, and the animals and the insects, they know that. So a long time ago, they used to soak their seeds before they planted it. And it's a technique I use even today. I soak my seeds for 4 days till they sprout little tails. But our ancestors, they used to soak the leaves of they used to soak the corn kernels with the little green leaves of the dewuji. And I did a test when I was in school at Fort Lewis, actually studying sustainable agriculture, I found that the corn that I actually soaked in the dark greasewood actually had more pest resistance and grew more vibrant, and actually had were eaten less as a seed and as a sprout, less when I soaked it with the dark greasewood. And this is what our ancestors used to do. And they thrived in conditions that very few people could grow in. So getting your tools ready, sharpening them, and this is what you'll get. You'll get a nice harvest, and you'll have healthy food. You'll have exercise, and you'll always have something to eat, and you'll have something for the winter to eat, and you'll have something to share that you know is healthy for you and your family, and that you worked hard for, and you're not afraid to share. And here's me planting with the planting stick, and as you can see, continuing the traditions that was taught for many, many years. And this will all help you. And if you have any questions, it's my job as the Agricultural Science Center to help anybody with their growing needs. And I'll leave my email. And I always like to leave people with a story, and I'll tell it fast because I think I have like 3 minutes left. A long time ago in the Second World, the animals they came across a similar problem, that they were running out of things to eat. They were facing starvation. So the animals got together, and they wanted to send emissaries out, or people, or different animals in different directions, to find a good source of food, and for the animal people to survive on. And the birds, they saw this, and they wanted to be a part of it. So they got together, and had a meeting. They said, whoever brings back the best source of food, that'll be the leader of all the animals. So the animals, they chose bobcat and badger. And the birds, they chose bluebird and hummingbird. And the rule was that after 4 days, they would have to come back and bring back whatever source of food that they found. So they each set out. Bobcat, he ran towards the east. Bluebird went south. Badger, he went west. And hummingbird went to the north. And they waited and waited, the animals, for their 4 days. And on the fourth day, when the sun was rising in the east, Bobcat came running up, and he was so excited. He brought white corn, and everyone was so happy. Right off the bat, they wanted to make Bobcat the leader. Everyone, the birds protested and said, "No, no, let's wait for the other representatives. Let's wait." And then, when the midday, when the sun was the bluest, Bluebird came back from the south, and he brought back blue corn. And everyone was so happy at this new food. They were, oh, it's so nutritious. And now we know that blue corn has anthocyanins, which kills free radicals in the body. So it actually is good for killing cancers, or helping with cancer prevention and things like that. But then they protested and said, let's wait for the other two representatives. So about afternoon, when the sun is the hottest, Badger came back, and he came back with yellow corn. And as we all know, yellow corn is the sweetest and best tasting. So they all want to make him leader, and like, no, 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 let's wait for hummingbird. So they waited and waited, and the sun was starting to go down, and everyone's like, oh, he's so little, he won't make it back. Something probably happened to him. Right when the sun was about to set, hummingbird came back, and he brought back Nadantas A and squash and beans and melon seeds, and everyone was so happy. And that's when they made all the four animals the leader in the fourth world. And that's where they made the planting laws, which we follow to this day, that we'll always have a cornfield, we'll always pray with Tadadeen, and we'll always have a grinding stone. And in this way, that we'll never go hungry, and starvation will never happen. But eventually the animals forgot, but we as people, when we were made, we never forgot these laws. And if we still follow these rules, and we still prepare for the growing season, and carry on to these traditions and all this knowledge, we'll always have stuff to eat, and we'll always be prepared for whatever happens. So quit it. Yeah.
Thank you, Brandon. We appreciate your presentation. It was very helpful, and the stories along with your presentation just brings us back to our history, in which we as Navajos need to continue to bring forth to our children and our grandchildren. I really appreciate those stories. I want to thank all the attendees that have participated in our webinar here. Please join us next week for our sheep management webinar series. Our topic will be Dene College Woolbuy Program. Our presenter will be Felix Nez, Dene College Land Grant Extension. Here are our contact information. Sadie Lister, Field Coordinator, Sharon Sandman, Assistant Field Coordinator, Jesse Jim, Field Coordinator, and Jenna Agent, Johnson, Assistant Field Coordinator. Thank you again for joining us today. We welcome your comments so that we may provide resources of interest to better farming and ranching methods. We will continue to host webinars, post information on Facebook relating to upcoming events, including monthly newsletters, videos, USDA resources, links, and recorded webinars. We have here some poll questions on the spring garden preparation. If you would just kindly answer these poll questions so that we know how to better our webinars and bring you the information that you would like, for us to bring to you. Thank you again, and please answer our poll questions.
I have a question, Sharon. Brandon talked about the plant, how we need to plant, and then we also plant for animals, and then we plant for insects, and then at last, we plant for ourselves. I thought that was very interesting. But once you do plant, and say you did get squash bugs and you have to replant again, say you were infested with it, how do you get rid of it?
Through Audrey, she gave a presentation. I'm not really sure, but anyways, I just learned that if you plant blue Hubbard squash in between your other squash, that works as a repellent. I don't know how blue Hubbard squash works as a repellent, but I just learned that recently, and I was going to try that this year.
Thank you, Sharon.
Do we have any more questions?
You have one raised hand from Farmland.
Okay, my name is Gloria Lane, and I'm with Navajo Ethno Agriculture, and we have really issues with the squash bugs. But I found that I've been planting zucchini and those yellow squash, summer squash, and then I've also done the Cushaw and Navajo Hubbard squash. And I found that on all squashes, if you start finding them early in the morning as eggs, you start using those the heavy tapes and start taking those eggs off the leaves from the bottom. They're really kind of like a brownish color from the bottom of the leaves. If you start taking those off and prevent that from maturing, then you're okay. But then again, you're a little bit too late when the egg starts hatching and you shake them and there's like a million that drops into the water. You have to put it on a shallow pan and then shake those little spider-like insects that are actually squash bugs. They'll fall into the pan. And you can you have to keep up with those. You don't want them to get to an adult stage. An adult stage, that's when it's too late. So if you see the squash bugs early at beneath the, around the plants and then underneath the leaves, that's a little bit too late. But if they're just now coming up as adults before they start laying eggs, that's the first step you have to do, is get those adult squash bugs off before they lay their eggs. After they lay their eggs and they have those little flies like underneath the leaves, that's when you lose your battle. And I use that. I also use that mixture of vinegar, soap, spray on the bottom to kind of use that as a repellent, and that seems to work. And those duct tapes work very well just to get those eggs from underneath the leaves. So if you start getting those eggs underneath the leaves, you're ahead of the game. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then, oh yeah, on those insects, you have to put it in a container. Don't drop it on the field or just leave them there. You have to put it in the container so they won't reproduce.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
Nice. Mhm. Well, thank
And-
you again for joining us.
Yes, and they like Blue Hubbard the best.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Eat the Blue Hubbard
Oh,
first.
yeah. So they eat the Blue Hubbard first before they even get to be big.
Oh,
Alright.
okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Let me know how your experiment goes. But one year we were remediating this field out in water flow, and we were growing sorghum Sudan grass, and to remediate the soil right next to the plot. And that year, for some reason, we had no bugs. I don't know. Karen, my wife, she attributes it to the sorghum Sudan grass. But yeah, Gloria's right. You have to get them early and you have to stay on top of them, else they just get out of hand.
Wow. When I planted squash last year, I was not infested at all. Thank you, Brandon. Well, I believe this completes our webinar for this evening. Thank you all for joining us, and join us next week, the same time,